In this week's content, Dr. Jones, among others, are discussing the unique challenges that come with parenting or discipling children and teenagers at varying stages of development. The reality, as I said in our post this week, is that all children develop a certain process. They develop in different rates, clearly, but there are certain cognitive and spiritual developmental stages. Say that a child from 0 to 2 years old faces that differ from a child at 6 to 8. And one of the points that the authors are going to make is that your goal in early parenting, particularly with a child in the 0 to 2, 0 to 3 range, is to establish authority. Now, authority in and of itself is a notion that's fallen on hard times in our culture. It seems that we have moved in our cultural perspective to what it means to be under authority, to submit to authority. It's something that perhaps even was once thought of as good for you to be under authority, to be under the care of others, is now thought to be a norm, a something that we reject just outright. No one's going to tell me what to do, right? But the reality is that is a terrible way to live life, and in fact makes it impossible to follow Jesus. Because the very point of submission to Jesus as Lord is that He is an authority over you, He is telling you what to do. And so, if a child, if I even, fail to recognize authority, fail to learn how to submit to authority, I'm going to have a really hard time in discipleship. And parenting provides me a unique category, unique way to introduce this idea of authority in the life of a young child. Around our home, we've often talked about as a theme from one of Tripp's books that obedience means you obey all the way, right away, and with a happy heart. And you haven't obeyed unless you've done each of those. You've obeyed all the way, right away, and with a happy heart. And every time I hear myself saying that, I think, is that the way I'm obeying God? Am I obeying Him all the way, right away, and with a happy heart? But we've tried to introduce this category of obedience for our children in order to communicate, hey, there is a supreme authority over you. Right now, mom and dad ultimately demonstrate or are supposed to respond or reflect the Father, God the Father's authority over you. And so as you respond to me as a parent, you're ultimately responding to God. And so I want to establish those categories of obedience. And we think about the ways that perhaps we typically approach parenting and whether or not that communicates the type of authority or submission to authority that we would want from children. Like imagine the Walmart checkout line, and you're standing there with the 3-year-old that's pitching a tantrum because they didn't get the Kit Kat bar, from the checkout stand, and you say, "You stop crying now, or you're going to be disciplined." And they don't stop crying, and you say, "I'm going to count to 3, and if you don't stop crying, I'm going to discipline you. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4, 3, right?" And then often even. Now, I'm being serious this time. I'm going to count to 3 again. And if you don't stop crying. Okay, so what has that practice communicated to the child? That practice has communicated their rules, but those rules are bendable, they're breakable. Really, authority only goes so far in my life. And so, what Jones and others are going to argue at this stage of development is that we have a responsibility to establish clear rules and make it clear that stepping outside of those rules has consequences. Sin has consequences. And this is the language that we want to establish in the heart and life of a 2-year-old in hopes that when the child is 16, that paradigm is still in place. Sin has consequences. And establishing that type of supreme authority is critical to do even at 2 years old. As you read and think this week and process, I pray that the Lord brings back to mind even your childhood, your upbringing, and some of the ways that you had to unlearn some negative practices as you sought to follow Jesus. And then as you seek to parent well, be a grandparent, love children in your church, that you have opportunity to establish this type of authority and communicate, hey, authority is actually a really good thing. God bless you as you study this week.